Hey everyone, we're here today with Stephane Eyskens from Xpirit here in Belgium, and we're going to talk about his new book. Stephane has written a fantastic book that has gotten a lot of feedback already on Twitter, and that's basically the reason for this interview. Stephane, can you first introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm Stefan Eyskens. I work as a cloud architect, so mostly Azure, of course. And well, yeah, I'm passionate by cloud topics in general.
Well, yeah, that was already my first question, actually. Where does that passion for Azure come from, really?
Well, basically, I'm quite an old timer already, right? So I'm 45. So I started my career, let's say, more than 20 years ago already. But basically, let's say since 2006, more or less, I really focused on Microsoft technologies in general, right? Because before that, I had diverse activities, let's say, not already a bit of Microsoft, but not always Microsoft. And so when I focused on Microsoft, I basically followed the trends of let's say, the vendor. So I started with SharePoint server that a lot of developers hated back in the days, and of course .NET and so on. And then at some point, Azure and SharePoint could played well together, right? Because SharePoint came with the concept of provider hosted apps. And that's really where I started to really focus on Azure because a good fit for provider hosted apps was Azure, right? So it's basically was SharePoint apps, but the backend was hosted somewhere else than in SharePoint. And that's really where I started to work professionally, let's say, with Azure. And then that's also where I said, okay, enough of SharePoint. So now let's focus on Azure. That's very promising, and basically that's how it started. And
Yeah.
of course, for an architect, there are so many services, so many models, service models that you have to deal with that it's a never-ending playground. It's an immense playground basically. So and a never-ending story because it keeps evolving. So.
Yeah. And I think that immense playground is probably what inspired you to create the Azure Maps, right?
Indeed, good question, Gilles. No, indeed. So if we see, let's say, how these maps were born, it's basically because the Microsoft documentation is great, right? You have a lot of docs, but sometimes it could even be a bit overwhelming, right? So you start, and often you also directly stumble upon really a walkthrough, right? So very concrete, very detailed, let's say, deep dive story. And then sometimes, and I had a lot of folks asking me, okay, know that I'm myself an Azure expert, let's say, asking me, okay, I would like to learn Azure. Where do I start? What do you advise me? And then you say, yes, my God. So because it's too big, right? All the service models and so on. So infrastructure, security, development. So there are plenty of stuff. And then at some point, I've been inspired by the Azure Machine Learning cheat sheet, which is something where you have a very condensed view of Azure Machine Learning, with like a decision tree. You need to do this. That's basically the service that is the most suited for this. And then I said, yeah, it's a pity that it was only or mostly for Azure Machine Learning. That's okay. I should build something around that. I mean, for other services. And then this concept or idea of map came up. And then I started to publish that on the Microsoft Tech communities. And then it was a very successful story, let's say. And that's how it was born. And then some people asked me, okay, yeah, maybe could you build a map on that topic, right? The goal is really to have both a horizontal view, but also dive a bit more into some verticals, right? So you
Yeah.
have like infrastructure map, security map, cloud native map, AKS maps or Kubernetes. And solution architecture map, which is the most high level map, right? Really the helicopter view of Azure. And then, yeah, when you need more info, you dive into a more specialized map, basically.
Okay. And I think that's also where the book came about, right? That's what inspired the creation of the
Indeed.
book.
So,
Can you
yeah,
tell us a bit about the book?
yes. So indeed, I have to give credit to Ed Price from Microsoft. So he's let's say behind the Microsoft Tech communities. So he basically noticed that my posts were very successful. So he said, yeah, you probably fill the gap because given the success on number of views and so on, what about making it a book? Basically, that's a bit how it started. And then I already wrote 3 books in the past. I was not very, I didn't plan to write any more books, let's say. And then I said, okay, yeah, maybe, which was my, Ed also proposing as a partnership there. That's okay. Why not? So, and then that's how it started. Basically, I had some material, so of course I revised my maps for the book. So it's not like the exact maps that were posted. And then also the book gave me more, let's say, space to explain also some of the choices, right? When you, for instance, position a service at a certain place, it could be subject to debate. Of course, you can't really debate in the book, but at least you can justify a bit why you put it there. And so in the end, that's how it started. And again, I think it's kind of unique because we have both horizontal view and that also and vertical views, right? And that also describes the day-to-day work of an Azure architect, at least of my own journey, right?
Yeah.
So I really, in my day-to-day work, speak to security architects, let's say infrastructure architects, application architects. You see, so that's a bit the journey of an Azure architect, let's say, and return from real world. I think that gives value to a book, well, to whatever you publish, basically.
But this is not a book for beginners, right? This is not, I've never done anything with Azure. Where do I start with Azure? I don't think that's the book for it, right?
Well, the thing is that, no, indeed. I mean, it's unique in the sense that it covers multiple dimensions, right? So even if you're not a beginner, say that you're a senior developer, yeah, there will be also infrastructure topics. So you need also to adhere, let's say, to the idea of exploring multiple dimensions. But indeed, you need to have some background, right? So if you're, because there are plenty of, concepts like, I don't know, base, acid, all these things that I don't re-explain, right? Because these are well-known, let's say, concepts for an architect. And of course, sometimes I give a very basic explanation, but I cannot go, through a deep dive explanation into each concept. Otherwise, you would need 10 books, right? So yes, you need a certain background, I would say. Yeah, that's for sure. That's clear.
But that's of course also, I think, the target audience is the architect who is looking to find his
or
way.
aspiring architects, you see.
Yeah.
So say that you are a senior developer, or you are, let's say, an infrastructure engineer, and you know very well the infrastructure space. So if you read my 2 chapters about infrastructure, maybe you won't learn too much, right? But then if you say, yeah, no, I want to step back a little bit and see how I can interact with my peers and other stakeholders, right, from other verticals, then the book is for you, right?
Yeah.
Because then you will grasp a lot from the other dimensions that you don't do in your day-to-day.
And I think it was last week, so that you got quite some feedback on Twitter, some retweets on Twitter from a few quote-unquote famous people. Tell us about that.
Yes, indeed. So that was, of course, awesome. So I've been indeed tweeted by Scott Hanselman, the Scott Hanselman. So, and of course, and Mark Russinovich. So that was, of course, great. I mean, I see that, of course, as some kind of endorsement of the book, right? This is a book to read, let's say. And I also know that Microsoft is interested in getting that as a let's say walkthrough, right, in their official documentation somewhere. I know that they are talking of it. So well, it's a nice recognition, let's say, of the of my work, let's say, of our work, because Ed also wrote a little bit of the book. But yeah, it's of course mostly based on my maps, so that's mostly my work.
Yeah. And how does this actually relate to what you're doing at our customers? So you've been working in Xpirit for quite some time now, and how does this actually relate to what you do? Is like a reflection of what you do, puzzling all the services together, or is it more that you're focused on one specific service at this point?
No, it's really a global view, right? So most services, of course, is not exhaustive, because first, Azure is a moving target. So, I mean, by the time the book is published, you might have a new service or a change, but I try to keep stuff up to date. But that's really, my journey, right? So what I do for customers is indeed that. So you come, and sometimes you have to speak to management, right? To have high expectations, because the cloud also raises some hopes, right? Or some when organizations go to the cloud, usually they have drivers in mind. So sometimes you have just to have bring some high level answers on, okay, what could be helpful for them. Sometimes that's more on the infrastructure side of things, and security, governance, and so on. You speak about landing zones. So basically, how do you define the group platform, right, for a group? and which rules, what makes sense, what is cloud native, what's not, because organizations often tend to replicate in the cloud what they do on premises, which is not always the best way, right? So that's also part of my role, to try at least to highlight some stuff, and then of course you decide, but then you take informed decisions about what you're doing. And then, of course, it's also supervising developers, right? So like technical architecture, let's say cloud native design patterns. So what you see in the cloud is heavily distributed, right? So most applications are heavily distributed. Sometimes you could end up with a distributed monolith, but it's still distributed. You see what I mean? So, and so that's also not so well known, let's say, by many developers, right? You can have very good .NET developers, but who have little experience with let's say, cloud services, the SDKs, of course, that you have that are more specific, but also how to assemble all these services to have a consistent solution, right? Especially because some services also have functionalities, really, that could be leveraged as is, so that you do not need to reinvent the wheel in code. So that's kind of things that I do on my day-to-day, to advise on these things, to review, and of course to really craft designs for the architectures, right? Solution architectures, blueprints, and so on.
Nice. And now summer is coming up, so are you relaxing already now with the book published, or is there any other books coming?
Yes, so actually, so another book is in the pipe already, but that's gonna be more about software architecture, so really focus a bit more on the code itself, or let's say really coding, design patterns, but not only, because of course books on design patterns, you have plenty of them today. So again, I think what will make this book a bit maybe will come with its own bits is basically stepping back a bit as well as software architects, see some frameworks that you might be confronted with, and I'm not talking about like .NET frameworks, but more like ATAM, right, methodology. So it's a, for instance, architecture trade-off analysis method, some enterprise architecture concerns, basically, again, as a software architect, what differentiates you from, let's say, a developer is, of course, that you are able to step back and speak to the different stakeholders as well. So what I do basically in the cloud, you can also, of course, do that in a more generic way. So the book will be more agnostic, let's say. Yeah, of course, I'll come with some examples and so on to make it more concrete. So the examples would be in .NET Core, or let's say .NET 5. But you see, so basically, that's going to be about software architecture in general, and what you should master as a software architect. So code, of course, but not only code.
And what is the deadline for writing it?
Well, everything should be written for August somewhere, right? So, yeah. So, no, yes, but okay, that should be okay.
All right. We're looking forward to that. All right. I have the book over here. I need to pick it up. It's right outside of the screen. Here it is.
Nice.
Can you see it? Yeah, it's not easy to see. So the book is called the Azure Cloud Native Architecture Mapbook. That's a mouthful. It's released by Pact. I think it was released, when was it? March? Was it March?
End of February. Let's see.
Okay.
End of February.
Yeah. So, okay, Stephane, thanks for having a chat with us. And I wish you a lot of sales with the book, really, because it's doing well, I think.
Hopefully. Thanks, Jill. So it was a nice chat, and then talk to you soon, of course.
Of course. Bye-bye.
See you, Jill. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Okay.